really know what we used to say. So we really love that future, eh? Oh shit. Don't drop the ball when it's through my way. Teleporting and immersion. Something. It won't respond. It's not working. Whoa. Why is it not working? Why is it not working? Oh, there is a fucking... like a... the other hole. Oh, there it is. Oh my god, that felt like
Half-Life Alyx supports 3 types of player movement: continuous movement, shift teleport, and blink teleport. Early on, one of the properties of blink teleport, and to a lesser degree shift teleport, was that players would often refer to the actual mechanic of teleporting when describing their movement through the environment. I teleported to the desk, or I teleported into cover, was often how players would describe their actions, and it served as an unconscious reminder that they were interacting with a game in a specific way. To address this, we made a couple of key changes early on that significantly altered the way players recounted their movement, and as a result, pulled them further into a more convincing virtual reality. One of these changes was the visual indicator that represented the teleport destination. we swapped the abstract cylindrical indicator used in the lab for a pair of holographic feet. The feet helped provide a sense of physical presence and indicated the direction the player would face upon finishing a teleport. We also added animated feet between the player's current location and the teleport target. These feet illustrated the path the player would traverse, further helping provide a fiction for their movement through the environment. Along with the visual interface changes, we also added audio of footsteps and body movements that would play after a teleport to effectively summarize the player's movement through the space. This isn't something everyone necessarily notices at first, but it is quite obvious when it's missing or incorrect. Footstep audio transformed how players described their movement through the world, and players would often refer back to movement in the environment as walking or running, as opposed to referring to game terminology.
There it goes. Damn. Some bullshit. Oh yeah, sorry babe, did I wake you?
compared to our traditional first-person experiences, in VR we found it was sometimes all too easy to create an intense atmosphere. This can be to the game's advantage, but it can also be detrimental in cases where our focus is on training players in some new mechanic. In intense situations, players frequently fail to notice or retain critical information, and as a result, we often had to reduce tension in areas of the game where we were introducing players to something new. The audio of the reviver here as the player descends beneath the hotel is designed to ease players into the idea that they will be encountering the creature that they had briefly seen as they entered the hotel earlier. The reviver's scream and its shadow on the wall are designed to reduce tension by indicating the position of the reviver around the corner, removing any potential surprise. Telegraphing the reviver's position and giving players the upper hand helps set up the resurrection scene, where players want to observe the reviver instead of shooting at it immediately. This is critical because this is the first time the player sees the reviver reanimating a zombie, and if players are too distracted to take it in, they won't be successful in the upcoming fight.
Oh, crap! Lightning dog.
Be careful, Alyx.
Oh my god, it went into a guy. Russell? Two shells left. New development? It went into a dead guy.
No!
Yes. I had to shoot both of them. It was nuts, Russell.
It sounds nuts!
Oh, it was.
One of the challenges with the Reviver's resurrection mechanic was training players that the Reviver was the target, and the zombie was effectively just an inert vehicle that could not be damaged. This was a significant departure from what we had been training players to expect. Up until this point in the game, players would see a zombie, shoot at it, and as long as they hit it enough times, it would die. The Reviver breaks that expectation, and in early tests, players thought the game was broken when the zombie wouldn't die or even react to being shot. We had to make a number of changes to revive zombies to train players that this behavior was intentional. First, we designed the revived zombies' introduction animation to use particle effects and audio to draw attention to the changes that result in this new type of combat. Second, we substituted in dull particle and impact sounds to make shooting the zombie feel less impactful than it did in previous encounters with ordinary non-revived zombies. And finally, we modified the revived zombie so that it doesn't play any flinch animation or respond to bullet impacts, further communicating to players that its behavior is different. We also used the Reviver itself to illustrate the new combat experience. Electrical effects were added to indicate the Reviver's movement inside the zombie, with a bright pop and glow as it emerged at a new location on the zombie's body. With these new visuals and satisfying impact sounds and screeches from the Reviver when hit, playtesters were no longer confused and consistently enjoyed the new combat mechanic.
In our early designs, a revived zombie was just an invincible zombie with a moving vulnerable spot. Playtesting revealed this to be less tense and threatening than the Reviver on its own, and since we wanted the revived zombie to be a higher stakes adversary, we needed to enhance its offensive capabilities. As a natural extension of the electrified nature of the Reviver, we chose to create an electrical field around the revived zombie, so that players who got too close would take heavy electrical damage. This worked well for many playtests, until we observed a player who was a proficient real-world marksman. This player was able to easily defeat the revived zombie without ever being threatened by it. In response, we gave the revived zombie its electrified ground counterattack, which forces players to change positions to avoid damage. This created a cadence of attack and retreat that was more tense and satisfying for all players.
Since a VR game must always be rendered from a virtual camera that matches the player's own point of view, we have limited opportunities to control what the player sees. Elevators are one of the few tools we have in VR to direct the player's view. A rising elevator like this one can be used similar to a crane shot that you might see in film, going from one elevation to another, revealing a beautiful vista or dramatic story beat. In VR, elevator rides can be challenging to make comfortable, as the motion of the virtual elevator is inconsistent with the player's own vestibular system. We found that we can make the elevator rides in Half-Life Alyx comfortable enough for most players by moving the elevator slowly and limiting how much the player could see out of the elevator. This particular elevator was initially far more open, but we gradually introduced more and more visual obstruction to the design so that the player always had some significant portion of the elevator in their field of view. This meant that we were able to get the dramatic reveal of the hotel exterior and Combine substation we desired, but players were comfortable since they could always see the elevator, which was in their own frame of reference.
not to be a worrier, but shouldn't Dad be back by now?
Well, let's think about it, Alyx. He's on foot, moving at 3 miles an hour. Plus, he's a fugitive. He's only got one leg. There's obstacles, no direct path. You know what? I'm not going to lie to you. He should be back by now.
Yeah. So I should be worried.
Normally, yes. But you're the one headed towards the danger, so I'd say we should be the ones worried about you.
After exiting the elevator, the player gets their closest view yet of the Combine substation attached to the exterior of the hotel. While the Combine architecture can veer into the abstract, it's often at its most successful when contrasted with a human structure. Beyond this, we always try to drive the visual design with an invented function, ideally to support the gameplay or story. In this case, the routing of some unusual power source to the vault from various parts of the city. The player doesn't know it at this point, but this substation is designed to essentially torture the song out of a group of Vortigaunts who are housed in the attached pod farms. The output is collected from the Vortigaunts before being reharmonized by a single conductor Vortigaunt via the cable tuner apparatus seen at the root of the transmission cables that run up to the vault itself. This design gave us the opportunity to subsequently meet another Vortigaunt, and acted as enough of a constraint to allow us to design an interaction that would physically compromise the substation as the player exits the hotel in the next map.
Oops. 24 resin.
You've almost got it.
Standing in one spot. Nope. Still don't have enough to get what I want.
Uh-oh. This guy's not wearing a shirt. Last two.
Zen foliage has been designed to respond to the player in a number of ways. In dark areas, where the flashlight is active, some Zen flora will animate or expand in response to the light. These Zen plants respond to the proximity of the player's hand by glowing and pulsing. The glow effect in particular is rendered with an offset using the correct binocular perspective for each eye, which gives the impression that the glow originates in the interior of the organism. The Zen flora's shader effects, which rely on hand proximity, take their input from a dynamic voxel field which follows the player at all times. The player's hands effectively draw motion trails in this voxel field, which can be sampled by the foliage's shaders to drive deformations and other shading effects. If the player moves their hands quickly, they produce motion trails in the voxel field. If they hold their hands still, they produce a radiating force. These different types of motion characteristics allow us to create different behaviors in the foliage to give it a bit of extra personality.
Particle effects present an interesting challenge in VR due to stereopsis, which is our ability to discern the depth of objects from two slightly different views of the world we see from our two eyes. Traditional particle systems, as seen on the left, were typically implemented as a series of flipbook images displayed on relatively large polygons, which orient to face the player. Each series of images would contain effectively a little movie of a more complex phenomenon like a wafting puff of smoke or a flickering flame and so on. For the monoscopic rendering used in non-VR systems, this approach holds up well and is widely used across the industry. Because of the stereo rendering used in VR, however, players can easily see the flat cards resulting in the unconvincing effect seen on the left. To address this, we had to update our particle rendering techniques for VR. The particle system on the right is an updated VR-friendly version of the older effect seen on the left. One technique we used on large cards, like the ones used in this smoke effect, was to create some drag on the card's reaction to the player's head movement. To do this, we created another particle system which lagged the player's position and was used as a player camera for the facing direction of the smoke cards. By removing this one-to-one relationship of head motion to sprite rotation, we were able to give the impression that the smoke effect was volumetric. In addition to using more 3D elements in the creation of our effects, we also often use the post-processing bloom on particles to help visually merge elements that otherwise would appear as a set of flat planes. This made the cards harder to stereo fuse, which gave them a more diffuse volumetric feel.
One of the tenets of Half-Life game design is creating crafted, moment-to-moment experiences that players participate in as they progress through the game. Sometimes this means playing with emotional responses to turn something undesirable into a memorable highlight. This collapsed section of the hotel features this type of experience. Players are often instinctively pulled to the safest looking location in a given area, and here that would be the well-lit corridor above. But when they get there, they find their way blocked by a Combine power shield. The power cable to shut down the Combine force field leads them back down into the poison headcrab-infested darkness below, a place they really didn't want to go. These larger gameplay spaces also need to be resilient to player choice, so even if a player chooses not to head up to the well-lit corridor, they likely will still have the same trepidation about heading down into the darkness below. After the player has braved the darkness and sheltered themselves in the lit room where they're safe from the wandering headcrabs, they're faced with the daunting task of cutting the power to the Combine force field, because this has the side effect of plunging the area into darkness. Not only does that make the situation worse, since the player must make their way out of the pitch blackness with only a flashlight, but the path to the exit is back through all the poison headcrabs. We spent a lot of time tuning this experience through careful playtesting and evaluation, and often, when recounting their travels through the hotel in post-playtest discussions, players would recall this moment of being plunged into darkness as a high point, managing to combine a feeling of amusement with the overall sense of dread.
Combine shield blocking your path.
I'll figure out how to shut it down. Lost 2 shells.
Alyx, it's your lucky day. That combine weapon's unbonded.
How are you sure?
It's still in the case. They never leave them in the case.
Nice.
I didn't even need to edit your genetic code.
I know. You'd love that.
That's okay. There'll be a next time.
Last one. Oh, man. 3 cells left.
A common game design problem is that of resource placement, and this spot in the game is a good example. Players have just left an area where they acquired the Combine submachine gun, and whenever they get a new weapon, we try to give the player the opportunity to experiment with it right away. So, right after the SMG, we make sure to give the player a bunch of ammo for it and a supply of not too threatening enemies, in the form of confined zombies and wandering headcrabs to experiment on. But playtesting has shown us that there's a wide range of ways that players respond to that setup. Some shoot a headcrab or two and move on, but some players take their time exploring the weapon, even using up all the ammunition we gave them. Now, after the headcrabs, the player is heading towards a new area, which features one of the hardest combat arenas in the game, where they must fight 2 revivers at the same time. How much ammunition can we expect the player to have here? How much should we put in this area between the 2 arenas to ensure all players will have enough to fight the 2 revivers? If we don't put in enough, player may be in a position where they cannot succeed at the upcoming encounter, and reloading their save games won't help them. They will need to go back and replay the previous area, this time conserving more ammo. That's not something we want to happen, nor is it something that we can expect all players to realize. Instead, many will repeatedly try and fail to be the 2 revivers. So, at its core, the problem with resource placement is that the dynamic range of resources carried by players can be significant, and it gets even wider as the game progresses. In Half-Life Alyx, we would see some players end the game with barely any ammunition, while other players had over 1,000 unused rounds.
So how can we handle resource placement when there's such a wide dynamic range in player collection and usage patterns? Like many games, we opted for a dynamic system that looks at the player's current resource counts and makes decisions based on them. But the design of these kinds of systems can be tricky, because they tend to affect player behavior. For instance, in Half-Life 2, we placed breakable crates throughout the game which dynamically spawned resources based on the player's current health and ammo levels. This had the advantage of allowing us to not need a huge amount of playtesting for resource balancing, because as long as there were enough crates around, the player would always have enough resources. But because that system exists, we didn't have to spend much time on resource placement, and as a result, we didn't really craft challenges around resource collection. Players also learned that they didn't need to really care about their resource levels, because the crates were always going to top them up on whatever they needed most. For Half-Life Alyx, we wanted to revisit those assumptions. We knew that searching for resources in a VR environment was something players really enjoyed. So we wanted resource collection to be something players needed to do throughout the entire game. And that meant we didn't want them to ever reach the point where they had so much ammo and health that they didn't need to explore. We were also able to start playtesting earlier in the product development cycle than we had been able to when making Half-Life 2, which gave us the confidence that we'd be able to spend the time we needed to carefully place every resource.
Those Combine shield doors are effective for letting them...
For Half-Life Alyx, we moved to a system that allowed us to craft a more specific experience, using a dynamic layer that attempts to reduce the dynamic range of resource gathering between players. Instead of placing generic resources that switch types, level designers carefully placed each resource type throughout the world. Some are easy to find, and some are more difficult. Then, as the player moves forward in the world, the system opportunistically removes resources in the path ahead based on the player's current resource levels. This had the benefit of allowing level designers to have a lot of control over the player's resource amounts in different areas of the game. They were able to craft areas where they wanted the player to be starved of one ammo type or encouraged to use another. For example, in this area, designers could provide enough ammo to ensure that the player would have enough to fight 2 revivers, with the knowledge that the ammo balancing system would remove much of it if the player was already loaded up. We could safely give the players a large amount of Combine SMG ammo in the previous arena, and know that the players who ran past the poison head crabs without firing a shot wouldn't find more here. There are a number of additional features to address complexities that result from this system, such as ensuring players always find something inside a Combine locker, or ensuring that players are still rewarded for searching carefully and regularly, even if they're carrying a lot of ammo. Ultimately, we want a player who is paying more attention to the environment to come out ahead resource-wise. We just needed some dials to be able to control how far ahead they got.
Okay, made quick work of that.
Up until this point, each Reviver encounter has been focused on teaching players something new about the Reviver so that they can defeat it. This arena represents the culmination of the training. There are no new rules, there is nothing to learn about the Reviver itself. By this point, players are armed with the knowledge required to progress. The challenge then shifts into a combat problem where strategy and execution are required. Players have to juggle and prioritize multiple targets, utilize all of their weapons, and manage a constrained supply of ammunition in order to prevail and make their way back out to the exterior of the hotel so they can deactivate the combined substation.
Shit.
of cells.
Did that dog come back again, Alyx?
Yeah, this one was kind of rough.
You're all right, though, right?
Yeah, Russ.
Well, we've got to get you out of here and up to the roof.
I'm working on it. All right. Here it is.
Now, just snip those cables and off we go.